So, welcome to the May 20th Eclipse OpenJ9 community call. As always, please add your name and affiliation just so we know who's been attending the call. And this week, we get to kick things off with a lightning talk from Toby on Project Valhalla. But before we do that, I'll just pause for a minute if there's to give anybody a chance to add any other topics they want to discuss or particular user focus questions we want to start with. Then Toby, if you're ready, I will turn things over to you. I will stop sharing and you can control.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, cool. All right. So today I'm going to talk to you about Project Valhalla. So just to introduce myself, my name is Toby. I'm a developer on the OpenJ9 VM team. So today I want to address four main topics, which are what is Project Valhalla about? Then I'll dive into why we need it, what problem is it solving, and then I'll go into some background, talk about some of the projects that have preceded it and how those have influenced it. And I'll discuss what the future looks like for Project Valhalla. So this talk is mostly going to be an overview. There will be follow-on presentations that will go into much deeper detail into the specific subcomponents of Valhalla, but the purpose of this talk is to just give you an idea of why we need this and, what is this about. So Project Valhalla is a collaborative effort proposed by Oracle. To summarize it, I'll borrow a quote from Brian Getz. The goal of Project Valhalla is to bring more flexible, flattened data types to the JVM-based languages to bring the programming model back in line with the performance characteristics of modern hardware. So there are two main points here. The first is that there is currently a shortcoming in the JVM that does not allow the JVM to make the most of the hardware. And I'll discuss this in more detail later. The second point is this, that in order to solve this problem, we need to find a way to express flattened data types in the JVM. So that's basically the big goal of Project Valhalla. This will be realized by a series of JEPs, the main one being inline types and specialized generics. So as the previous slide alluded to, currently the Java type system doesn't quite fit with the performance characteristics of modern hardware. In the past couple decades, CPUs have been able to do more. They can now process more instructions per cycle than ever before. However, memory latencies haven't improved as much. So CPUs have been adding bigger caches to mitigate this problem. But even with these improvements, memory latency is still a major bottleneck to performance. So here are some latency numbers from a i7 5th gen processor. It's a fairly old processor nowadays. But it just kind of gives you an idea of, the relative differences between memory latencies when you go from different types of memory. So this chart shows you the optimistic numbers. These are the best case numbers. So at the top, you have a register access. And then below that, there's L1, which you can see is slower, about 4 times slower. Below that is L2, which is about 10 times slower than register. And the trend kind of continues that way. Once you get to RAM, you're going multiple orders of magnitude slower. So what this table shows is that it needs to have condensed data where temporal and spatial locality are aligned. This basically means that you want the data that you will access together to be stored in memory together. As soon as you have to move up to a higher cache or memory tier, then you pay the latency cost, which will hamper performance. So this is what a typical Java heap looks like. There are lots of references, lots of pointer chasing. It's not very cache efficient because the related objects, that is, objects related with respect to access patterns, are not necessarily positioned near each other. And with an object graph like this, there's a high likelihood of cache misses, which is detrimental to performance. Another problem with this picture is that there's a lot of pointer chasing. Sorry, there's a lot of headers, um, and that contributes to footprints. So a large footprint makes it less likely that you'll be able to fit all the related data in the same cache line. And this makes cache misses more probable. A large footprint also means that you'll spend more time doing GCs, which is bad for performance. So this is what Project Valhalla is attempting to solve. It's attempting to fix this picture and make it more hardware friendly. So this is not a new problem. It's been known for quite some time. In fact, there have been many attempts in the past to fix this problem. Project Valhalla was proposed in 2014, but there were other projects that preceded this that also attempted to solve it. So what these projects mainly try to do is they try to solve this problem by flattening. This is basically where you take a reference field and place it within its structure. In other words, you flatten its inside of its container. So here's an example with with a type with two instance fields. So we have line has two instance fields, start and end. And on the left, you can see that both of these are references. By flattening, we'll take these references and flatten it within its container. So on the right is the result of flattening. So as you can see, when fields are flattened, there is less pointer chasing. So we've gotten rid of two references. In this case, on the right, it's more likely that start and end will be in the same cache line, which is better for performance. And also, we've gotten rid of headers and references, so the total footprint is less. So these are the benefits that you get with flattening. You can do something similar with arrays. In this case, we have an array with 3 elements. If you flatten it, all those elements go in place, and you've got a reduction in footprints, and it's much more cache efficient. So you may have noticed that this is something you can already do with primitive arrays. This is why primitives tend to have better performance in Java code. However, there are only 8 primitive types, and the way to aggregate them is by using objects. Also, primitives cannot be used as generic type parameters. So the most performant Java types are the most difficult to use, which is essentially the problem. So earlier I talked about how there were some projects preceding Project Valhalla. One of them was packed objects. This was proposed by the J9 team around 2012, I think. Some in the audience might know the exact date. It was released as a tech preview in Java 7. So packed objects looked a lot like regular Java code. All you had to do was add some annotations. And when you did that, the effect was what we saw earlier. You were able to flatten things inside the container. So you might be wondering, why didn't we end up sticking with packed objects? Well, packed objects didn't really get rid of references. You still had to deal with references, except that these references pointed to flattened locations. This caused issues with identity. Array semantics were a little different from Java semantics. So the drawbacks were not the underlying technology per se, but the drawbacks dealt with the language, the Java language itself. It was just difficult to use it with existing Java types, which made a barrier for this project. There was another one proposed by Azul. It's called Object Layout. It's similar to packed objects, except there were no language changes. It's mostly a library, and there is an annotation that carries a special meaning. It's the intrinsic annotation. Essentially, the JVM may choose to flatten that type or not. The drawback to this is similar. Because everything is done in an API, it doesn't integrate well with existing Java types. Object layout arrays do not integrate with existing Java arrays, so you end up having a split hierarchy, which makes it very difficult to use with existing code. And then there's the unsafe hacks. These are techniques where you can create flattened objects using unsafe APIs. The drawback with this code is that it's difficult to maintain because you have to manually keep track of offsets. And a large chain of unsafe code isn't the easiest thing to optimize. But people do this, people have done this and continue to do this because of the deficiencies with the existing object layout. People haven't had a choice, so they've come up with creative solutions. Project Valhalla aims to fix this. Ideally, the end solution is that people don't have to choose between programming simplicity and performance. Ideally, they get both of those things. So how is Project Valhalla going to solve this? Well, there's two main parts to this. The first is inline types. So if you've heard of value types, inline types are the same thing. This will allow the JVM to describe types that do not have identity semantics and as a result can be flattened. So this will be the topic of my next presentation. The second is generic specialization. Currently, Java generics are erased to Java-like objects, which imposes pointer-heavy, cache-inefficient memory layout. The goal of specialized generics is to be able to specialize generics over primitives and inline types. And both of those types have a much better memory layout. So this will also be a topic of a future presentation. Here are some of the other related projects. Some of these are not officially under the Project Valhalla umbrella, but they were all spawned out of the discussions in the Valhalla group. So Nestmates aligns the VM language rules regarding private access with, so it aligns the VM and language rules regarding private access. In the past, the JVM was more restrictive with private access, so the language compiler needed to generate accessors. This is a flaw that would have only gotten worse with specialized generics, as you'd have to generate even more accessors. So it was decided that something had to be done to fix this gap. Constant dynamic is a tool that provides an avenue to compute constant values in a manner that's easy for the JIT to optimize. There are plans to use this for constant lambda expressions, but this will also be useful with specialized generics when specializing constants for different specializations. And then there's the constable API that describes constant pool constants. Right now, the plan for generic specialization is to specialize the constant pool. And specialization will likely be done in the Java API. So this project provides a foundation, it provides a tool that can be expanded upon to peek and poke at the constant pool. And then there's seal types. This project limits the number of classes that can extend or implement a type. And there are plans to use this for inline type wrappers or boxes, where the wrappers are sealed to only be implemented by the inline types. So that's it for today. As I said, there will be more talks later that will dive deeper into the details. If you're wondering when these features will be released, I think the most accurate answer is I don't know, but we're definitely closer to the end than we are to the start. So I guess if there's any time, I can take some questions.
I'm noticing that JEP 360 sealed classes preview is part of Java 15, or it's proposed for Java 15, and the review is today.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure when that one would be released, but I know it's been in the works.
Does anyone have any other questions for Toby? Okay, well, thanks, Toby, for the whirlwind background on Project Valhalla and some of the pieces that have gone into it and some of the tech that's already come out of it or going to be coming out soon. Looking forward to the talk again next week that hopefully will dig deeper into some of the implementation details. Right, I will pull Firefox back up. And then we'll take a quick look at the user-raised issues, the recent ones that have come in since the last week. There's this memory regression being investigated in 020. Thank you to Marius for jumping in and taking a look at that.
Yeah, I have an idea what it is, and I'll talk to the guy that opened it, so track it down.
Thanks. From the same user, there's a segfault compiling a particular method, which is also being investigated.
I thought this was already fixed.
Possibly.
It's an AFT issue that has been fixed by E.
Okay. All right. Invalid memory access crash. This one I don't know. We'll have to take a look at this because I'm not sure this has gotten any attention yet. All right. GAC has been looking at the VM death, JVMTI callback. I think these two are actually related. The other JVMTI function, it's crashing at a particular point, possibly around the same time that that VM death event is happening. So, all right, so that's the ones that have come in since the last OpenJ9 call. It looks like only one of these or maybe two of these need a little bit more investigation or focus. So that'll be good if people can grab those and at least start the investigation there. I had called this out, but it looks like it's being addressed, so I don't think it needs further work there. I do want to flag two other sets of queries we have here. And that is the help wanted and the beginner issues. So just a reminder to everyone, if there are small issues along the way that you're finding, open an issue for it, tag it as a beginner issue or as a help wanted, and let's see if we can make the project more approachable and an easy place for people to get started by picking up some of these help wanted or small things. And then I guess the other piece of that is not only do we have to open them, but then we need to leave them for a bit to let others come along and pick them up instead of us always finishing all of these things along the way. We need to leave some of this easy to get started issues for people to pick up. So just be thinking about that as you're working on things. If there's some minor cleanup issue or something, that would be a good place for somebody to get started and practice building and working with OpenJ9 to create those issues and flag them as help wanted or beginner. All right. Andrew, are you on the call and have you had a chance to update the graphs?
Yes, they've all been updated and the trends continue in the direction they have been, which is good.
Is this on the new API yet, or is this still on the V2?
No, it's not, unfortunately. I keep saying I'm hopeful for that to be available shortly. And unfortunately, I'll keep saying that. Yeah, fingers crossed. Shortly, we'll have the new API. But I'm hoping the figures won't be too different from what you're seeing here, to be honest.
Yeah, it would probably be good to have the graphs from both versions at the same time, just so we can compare them before we switch over. Maybe if we have both graphs for a week or two, and then.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It might take a little while for the new data that's been added to the database to gather enough statistics to get a trend. So yeah, but hopefully, surely we'll have that.
In terms of our releases and upcoming releases, we have the retrospective issues from the last release here. If there are other things people want to add to that, feel free. Will be something that we keep an eye on as we look at how improve our releases going forward. I do want to call out the milestone plan for the 021 release, which ships in July, and I believe the code split date is June the 7th. So right now we have 52 open items in this plan across the various teams. And so if everybody can take some time to focus on the issues in this milestone and make sure that we're going to close them out before that June the 7th split date, that would be really good to particularly user raised issues or crashes to be able to get that stabilized for the next release. So we're not trying to cram these in late in the process. I know there's a number of things tagged against myself in here where I need to get the reviews through. So if you're waiting on me for something, feel free to ping me and others as well if you're being blocked. In terms of regular updates, Shelley, are you on the call for? I don't see Shelley. Stuart or others, does anyone want to provide an adopt update?
Much to say really from my point of view, but just back on the kind of inter-release, try and get a few work items through and get on top of the 90 build triage situations again as usual. I don't think there's anything particularly that noteworthy going on. I know Shelley's trying to again get some enhancements to the test tooling in as well.
Sorry, I lost this window. I'm trying to work from home and I've got far fewer screens, so I can easily lose windows. The AIX builds, I think, are now working okay and hopefully don't have the problem that Peter was concerned about the embedded lib path pointing to other versions of Java, potentially. And also, we now have a RISC-V board, a physical one, at Adopt OpenJDK, which we're trying to set up at the moment. We're having some issues with the Fedora installation on it. We're working with Cheng on that. That's the two main things this week that are relevant.
I noticed today that I used the V3 API to download an AIX build, and I didn't get the latest build, so I opened an issue at Adopt in the OpenJDK.
Okay, is that in the API v3 repository? Yeah. Okay.
So I'm also wondering if it's the same for Mac and Windows, because they have plus 10.2 and plus 10.1 releases. Could be if you're using the V3 API, you're not getting those.
Possibly, yeah. It's not something anyone else has reported, so thanks for that.
Pete, if that's something you want to track, can you add the issue to the agenda and we'll follow up on it again next week as well?
Yep.
Thank you. In terms of the machine updates, Joe or Adam, is there anything that needs to be called out?
Well, I was just updating that. I guess the Adams fixed both, so I'm not really the one to talk to exactly what the problem was, but we had some network problems at UMB, which appear to have happened on the UMB side with their link. they've redirected somewhere else through their provider, and it seems to have gotten better, but it's not back to the performance that we used to have. Our UNB network team is working with their provider to actually restore their performance. We also had OSU Artifactory problem, which appears to have been resolved. We know what was the problem with we know what the fix was on the system, but we don't know why someone had, there was a naming conflict in the host file, and we have no idea why it was modified. From our records, it's been like that for over 6 months. So that's actually the last time the machine was rebooted as well. So we're not really sure exactly what happened, but it's been fixed. I was just actually updating the disk usage, the disk stats, but I haven't opened up the job yet, but we haven't had any flags. So I believe they're probably still fine. But that's the only thing I have to mention.
All right. Thanks, Joe. For the website design review, is there any updates along there?
Yeah, this is Peter Hayward. We got to the point really we could do with approval from whoever. I guess I'm addressing really Dan or Peter or Mark to go live. There's a link there to the OpenJ9 website issue. Somebody, if they could put a comment in there just to say we're okay, then we can start doing the work to actually make those pages live. So that's it.
Thanks, Peter. I'll make sure that myself or Peter and Mark put a comment in there as well, hopefully either today or this week.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of discussion in there, but I think Sue's covered everything that's been said so far.
The one thing that I called out is the old website has a bunch of links to articles. And once we move to the new website, we won't have that reference anymore. So I was hoping we could preserve some of those links somewhere. So there's a little bit of discussion about that.
Yeah, I forget what the final answer was from Sue on that one, but let you deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's a suggestion to put it into the user guide, some of the links that were still relevant.
Yeah.
I think we were asking people which articles they wanted to keep, and nobody really responded.
I guess that's something to work on going forward rather than holding up the whole thing.
Yep. I think we should just make the switch.
All right. In terms of other business, Devin, the CMake migration, I know you were targeting yesterday for or tentatively targeting yesterday for the OSX.
Yeah, the UNB machine failures kind of threw a wrench in that plan, so it took a lot longer to get some of those PRs through. I still got a couple of last-minute PRs. There's now maybe a potential intermittent issue with getting the debug info when you're doing the DDR gen stuff, so I'm looking at that. But hopefully it doesn't push things out too far. At the moment, I'm guesstimating the end of the week.
Okay, so we're talking the 22nd kind of thing is when you think that'll be ready to go live?
Yeah.
So I'll update this. And just a reminder to everyone to please try out the CMake-based build. And in particular, as we get close to that switchover date, to call out any issues if there are any.
So what exactly is planned for the switchover? Well, is this the date we're going to ask Adopt to change the way they build the nightly?
Ideally, actually, we just make the change into the JDK extensions repo so that it defaults to -- with CMake on OSX. So none of that actually needs to change. It's just if you were building effectively all the commands you ran to run the UMA build now magically run the CMake build.
Okay, so adopt will get the change automatically. And then we'll have, in our regular nightly builds, we'll have the old build and we'll have a CMake build, and then we'll be able to delete the CMake build because it'll just be a duplicate.
Correct.
Does adopt already have CMake installed on its machines?
I believe so, yes.
And are there any other dependencies that it would need other than CMake to change over the build?
Versus the UMA build, no.
Okay, cool. It's worthwhile double checking that that CMake's installed on all the machines first, just to make sure we don't cause them grief.
Yeah, I believe there was an issue open there that then they run a test build. I didn't see the update with the result of whether everything there worked or not. But
yeah, we enabled it for macOS to test it because that's the first one you were switching over, and that worked okay.
Okay, cool, thanks. Great.
It certainly should be on all machines. If not, we can catch it as and when it's doing it, as and when we switch over.
We also had an issue for OpenJ9 for verifying that it was on each machine. Yep. That was done. So it's on. I believe it's on every machine, but we only actually verified on compiled machines.
So that's the important ones. Yeah, we are running the CMake builds in the open, and it was working until we had the UNB problems, and then last night we ran into that intermittent build problem, and for some reason I couldn't restart the job, but it already died. So I did rerun the build, but we didn't get any testing.
So sounds like we have a couple more PRs there to get resolved, and hopefully that'll put us in a good position to make that switch over on Friday. Any other comments or concerns around the CMake migration? Mark, did you have any updates on the interim release proposal?
No, there haven't been any updates in the last week there. I think the main issue that I want to drive forward there is what the actual frequency would be. I guess there have been two kind of suggested ideas. One is monthly, one is every 6 weeks. My preference, I think, would be monthly if I had my my vote, but there hasn't been any further discussion. I've been very busy this week, so I haven't been able to drive anything more there. But I'll try to get the discussion continuing in that issue this week. If anyone has opinions, please feel free to add them to the issue directly.
Raghu, did you want to discuss the Kubernetes Helm and operator issue here, or continue that discussion in the issue?
I think we can continue the issue. I'm just trying to take a look at what's the way we can organize it. But please do comment on, for example, on the directory structure thing. Some examples I provided. I'm going to come back on the second question. I had to grab some food. I'm going to be replying to that in a while. But this is good. I think this all looks good. I have given some clarification already.
Okay. So, in particular, for any others who are involved in Helm or knowledgeable around operators, this is a great place to share some of your knowledge or to weigh in on how we should be approaching this with OpenJ9. And Scott, I see you have an issue here for the microJIT or template JIT compiler. Did you want to give an introduction around this?
Sure. So for the past almost year now, we've been working on rewriting the old microJIT from J9 to OpenJ9. And we're looking now to do our first PR. We've got it open, but one of the things we wanted to do was talk about the general architecture and how we kind of integrate at the moment. So currently, MicroJIT, as in terms of when it compiles, when it starts, it's hooked in compilation thread right before compilation info per thread base compile would be called. And we're doing a stack-based solution. So it's a templated compiler, so it does no optimizations, always does the same block of code for a bytecode every time. And the idea is that we're kind of following the Java spec a little more closely so that it's easier to implement a bytecode. So we use a computation stack. We have a local variable array for accessing parameters and storing and loading local variables. And we're looking for any feedback on kind of the design overall, any information people would like to see in the issue. It also currently uses an extra to field in the method structure. So we're not overriding TR's count. It does allow TR to compile afterwards, so TR can still pick up and compile methods that have already been compiled by MicroJIT. On our future roadmap, we're looking at omitting profiling instructions so that TR can still get all the information it needs to perform good optimizations. And we also have some options that we've added. So first you need to build with the enable MicroJIT flag to the configuration. And that requires using a change that we also have a pull request for in OpenJ9, OpenJDK, JDK 8. We're currently only working on JDK 8 at the moment. This is a research project with the University of New Brunswick. So it's mostly just a couple of students working on it. And when you build with that flag, then you can use MicroJIT by enabling it by passing mjit enabled equals 1 to the xjit options, and then you can set a count, which I believe our default is currently at 20, by setting mjit by passing mjit count equals and then some whatever your desired count is for when MicroJIT should compile things. And we also have an option for turning off TR to compile with just MicroJIT, with the intent of allowing that flag to disable more and more of TR, and possibly have a flag to not compile portions of TR selectively for trying to target resource-constrained environments. And then on the other side, with TR enabled, we're trying to improve startup times.
Okay, that's a really cool sounding project. You indicated there are two major goals of this. One is the embedded or constrained environments, and the second is to improve startup out of the box. Is that,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, is that an accurate summary?
That's a perfectly accurate summary. Yeah. So this project started originally back in 2016 or 2015, and a single master student was updating. That was before OpenJ9, and that was a single master student ported the Java 6 version of the MicroJIT that used to be written in Smalltalk to the then C implementation for Java 8 of J9. found a couple of issues in trying to port that to OpenJ9, namely due to the change in interpreter style. The old microjit used to allow itself to compile pieces of a method and switch back and forth between the interpreter. It also didn't have the same stack frame shape as TR. And this was going to get a lot of how we would interact with TR and how we would interact with OpenJ9's interpreter. So we decided to rewrite it, taking a lot of inspiration from the old microjit in terms of how we would compile code. So the original project, they were able to improve startup times, but they found that they were not able to beat AOT, which isn't very surprising. And they negatively impacted throughput because there was a loss of profiling. So that's why omitting profiling instructions is on our future roadmap.
Do others have questions for Scott?
I think it sounds very cool, but I would really like to see in the write-up how this is going to interface with the other major technologies that cross the JIT VM interface. So things like HCR, FSD, OSR, like the AOT or shared class cache stuff. It would also be good to understand how your profiling stuff relates to the current iProfiler and JIT profiler, whether you're planning on consuming any of that. Right? I think we need a bit more context on how it's all kind of hooked together, right? The frame is one thing, but how it conceptually all fits together in relation to those technologies, I think, is the thing of greatest interest to people who do a lot of the JIT design work.
So thank you for that. We're currently pretty early in the prototype stage. So right now, we don't have support yet for full speed debugging. We don't have, or on-stack replacements. Really any of the more advanced features of TR in terms of its ability to do more. AOT is, as far as I know, I haven't tested it, but as far as I know, there shouldn't be any problems with AOT. We currently trigger microjit compilations based off of count and compile, and I'm not 100% sure on how AOT works, but I wouldn't expect AOT is still running count and compile from the interpreter on anything it's loaded. So if AOT is turned on, I would expect that anything that was AOT compiled would not get recompiled with worse code by microjit. And I can't imagine why you would want to save the microjit compiles because they're already fast compiles. And in a memory constrained environment where microjit is where it's something you want to have turned on, I would exclusively, and you would want to turn TR off. I would imagine that the space that's taken up by saving the compiles, because the compiled code coming out of microjit is going to be even larger, might be a problem. Although I'm not 100% sure on the relative size of JITted code to the kinds of things that are running on, say, an IoT gateway, and how much storage space they'd have available. The intent is to kind of have microjit more or less work in the default path, and then have it turn itself off if other options are turned on, and then as we add support for other things, allow it to work with those options.
So I think there's a lot of interesting questions here, and I think in terms of being the most productive and the best way to record some of this would be to get some of these questions reflected into this issue and have a longer discussion through the issue. So, Andrew, if you can, you may have already.
Yeah, I already posted. Yeah, I already posted about that. One of my it's very cool, but one of my concerns is that we would be essentially having to maintain 2 full sets of infrastructure. So that's one concern that I have that I'd like to sort of hash out in the issue is kind of where does sharing make sense and how much duplication is going to be needed.
Agreed, and a clear story of what use cases we're targeting with this code and how that fits into, as you mentioned, into the other pieces of technology we're developing.
So I can certainly add those things to the issue. I don't know if I should edit the issue above or put it in comments below. I'm kind of new to contributing to this project in the open. But I can certainly add those things to the issue and into the discussion about the issue. A comment on reuse. So as I said before, this is a project mostly, there's just a couple of grad students on it. It's myself and 2 of my colleagues. So all the reuse we can do is great. I would like to reuse as many things as possible. That certainly helps us get more done more quickly. So right now, we've been kind of rolling a lot of things by hand in terms of linkage and maintaining the stack frame shape for transitions, mostly because the private linkage is a little hard to penetrate from an outside perspective. So if anyone can, if they start looking through the code in the PR and they see areas where we can reuse things from the linkage to either improve support or cut down on code reuse, that would be awesome. And more or less, the only new code that's added by microjit is the hook, where you call the microjit compiler. And the code generator for microjit.
Right. Anyway, we can continue the discussion on there. I mean, obviously, one of the things that's coming up that you should be aware of, since you are interested in the linkage, is that the Valhalla work is ultimately going to result in linkage changes to optimize the passing of value types. So we're going to want to try and avoid having to duplicate that work or make you guys duplicate that work. So we certainly need to talk about that offline. But yeah, I'd like to see if we can try and minimize the double maintenance, because I think otherwise we run a real risk of something rotting.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, we're well over time at this point, so why don't we call this for today, and we'll have the next one of these calls next week. So thank you everyone for attending, and we'll continue to chat through the various issues and Slack as well.